at 8 o'clock. So this is information. Yanis, please go.
Good afternoon, everybody here. We're going to continue with the bench in computational stimulations in bifurcation stenting. I co-chair with Dr. Finet and Dr. Beier, who have a beautiful panelist group here. And we can start with Dr. Samady Habib. He's going to present about the general thoughts of how important it is, if it's important to simulate bifurcation stenting. Welcome from the US on trip. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And there are not many meetings where you go to where you put clinicians together to talk about computation. So I only have a few minutes, and I think Yanis just wanted me to talk about why we think it's important to do simulations. But I did think to state the obvious, what is the unmet need that, as we hear in this great meeting that you guys have been doing for many years, the outcomes of bifurcation PCI are not optimal. We have learned a lot from the work of John Ormiston and others in micro-CT bench studies, which have ultimately informed our clinical strategies. And as we and others have discussed in the past, there are both vessel level and strut level hemodynamics that play a role in stent healing and ultimately clinical outcomes. And this happens both at the micro level as well as at the macro level. And then ultimately, just like we heard for the bifurcation studies with OCT, that clinical trials are going to be required to really inform us whether it's worth going through all this to improve outcomes. So I'm only going to show you one slide here. This is a recent meta-analysis that was performed of 9 randomized clinical trials with 3-year follow-up, over 3,000 patients. And this meta-analysis looked at randomized clinical trials. And the punchline of this was that the 2-stent strategy, you incur a greater mortality than you do with provisional strategy. And obviously there are a lot of issues with this, but the point here is that even in 2019, we're not where we need to be with outcomes. And so I think there is an unmet need for us to understand better how we can improve our stents and our stent strategies. And I just put one slide here from Dr. Ormiston's work, who's taught us a lot about micro-CT. On the left, you have the traditional old crush that we don't do anymore. And then the next one is the mini crush. And then, of course, we've learned a lot about the double kissing and how it opens up the side branches. And it's this sort of bench work that then leads to some of our strategies about pot and dot and double kissing. But then what about the hemodynamics? Bifurcations, we understand from Dr. Vermani and others that even de novo lesions tend to co-locate in the outer hips of bifurcation where flow is disturbed. And now you can imagine adding the complexity of complex lesions and stent structures to there. And along with Professor Serruys and Dr. Chatzizisis and others in the community, we're very interested in studying this. This is an example of a reconstructed vessel. This is not a bifurcation, it's just an angulated vessel that's been reconstructed. And this is comparing 2 different metallic stent strategies with respect to the wall shear stress. But really, you might say, gosh, there's more to this than just the big vessel. Let's dive in at the micro level. There's a lot we've learned. But what I'm learning from our engineering colleagues is reconstructing the stents the stent platform itself is extremely complex. And there's very, very detailed angiographic and OCT work that needs to be done to get patient-specific geometric models. Subsequently, very fine meshing needs to happen. And obviously, with the whole BVS sort of journey that we all went through, there the struts are much bigger. With metallic struts, when you're thinking about 70 or 80 microns, it's even more challenging. And then in addition to that, you need very, very high-end supercomputers to do the fine mesh with the smaller struts. And then you do need post-processing in order to extract these millions of data points. So this micro-level analysis is extremely complex, but I think will, as proof of principle, inform our strategies in terms of what is acceptable. These are patient-specific data. You can see in red the high wall shear stress, and in blue at the base, the lower wall shear stress. This is an example of a BVS strut with areas of recirculation on either sides and high wall shear stress. And you can quantify the changes in wall shear stress here. And if you have a malopposed segment, you can see that there's disturbed flow across there. So the question is how do you test this prospectively? And as you know, there are a couple of studies. I did want to put a quick plug for a study that we're involved with, where we're simply comparing two metallic stent strategies with respect to their conformability in the wall shear stress and angulated coronary arteries. And there are a number of sites, including many colleagues right here. Some of the leaders of EBC have been involved with this study. And of course, Dr. Chatzizisis is going to talk to us a little later in the session about the flow ISR study, which uses computation specifically. So I think, yes, simulations are important. We've discussed why, because there's an unmet need. We've discussed the importance of micro-CT bench studies and both macro and micro level studies, and very importantly, the importance of prospective studies. So I look forward to the rest of the session. Thank you. I want to thank our research collaborators here.
Thank you so much, Habib. We can take a couple of questions, if anything. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have been following in working in parallel with Atlanta. I think that what I learned over the last 2 years is the fact that you have to try to be pulsatile, because obviously in systole there is basically no shear stress, and a lot of things is happening in diastole. That's the first point. The second point is that when we develop what we call the cell tracking, I was very impressed by the chaotic motion of these cell tracking, and things like oscillatory stress, which was for me kind of abstraction, became a reality when you see really the cell not moving on a spot, and it can happen 100, 200 micron from the top of the struts. I think that the 4D is absolutely essential. We start to have 4D wall stress. I'm going to move in a place where we are practicing that, because really I think the key point will be as soon the image is becoming real time. Every time in medicine where something get real time, then you start to make the progress, because then the clinician start to understand these colorful pictures and then can interact of that. That's what we have seen in the previous session with OCT 3D. That was at some point a curiosity. Now it's amazing that 5 years later everybody is, a great deal of people is using. So I think that the shear stress online, the wall stress online, which is also 4D possible if you don't take into account what is in the vessel wall, but just the envelope of the 3D corneal angiography is coming. But we are going to make progress only when it will be in the lab. Originally, when I started to work on shear stress in the year 2000, it took 3 weeks, if not more, to get some colorful pictures. So we are really making progress, and in the case of the bioresorbable scaffold, I think we were able to pinpoint what will be the trouble with this technology somewhat in advance. So that's really showing the clinical value and the potential impact of what otherwise seems to be the desire of the engineer to go into detail. Yeah.
I mean, we know that, you know, the big boxy struts are not good, right? We've known that theoretically, and work from your lab and other labs have shown, and our lab a little bit, that basically you pay a price for the low wall shear stress when you have the big boxy struts. So we know smaller struts are better. We also know that round struts generally are better than square struts. To me, the exciting part is, how do you interact with the underlying plaque? What happens with calcified plaque? What happens with plaque prolapse? What level? We heard so much about drug-eluting balloons today. And people say, well, if I have a type B dissection, I leave it alone because I think it's fine. But really it's the hemodynamic effects of that impact not only the platelets, but the healing that happens. And so for me, it's really the interaction between the biomechanics and the complex coronary plaque that can only be tested clinically. So to your point, you have to have online studies, you have to have proof of principle studies that teach us what we can do. And then ultimately in practice, you may not need the wall shear stress, but it's going to inform our strategies.
Yeah. And vice versa. I mean, when personally I discovered the Kume equation not so long ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago. We all know the Navier-Stokes, but we don't know how to translate that in viscosity. And the fact that you can transfer shear stress in viscosity in non-Newtonian and then start to understand that the concept of rouleau that you see with red cell is indeed operational, and then the blood also became an important component on top of the vessel wall and its constituent. So the whole pictures of the vulnerable blood and vulnerable plaque in a vulnerable patient take, again, a lot of sense, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, and I invite Dr. Iwasaki for his presentation. Dr. Iwasaki, for this presentation, the flow disturbances induced by jail struts.
Thank you, Chairman. My topic today is incomplete stent apposition should be reduced in terms of flow study. So in left main bifurcation, difference of the diameter between LMT and LD is larger compared with that in other bifurcation region, and stenting with a pot would induce incomplete stent apposition at proximal bifurcation site. And KVT is recommended or mandatory to open overriding stent of side branch ostium, especially in left main bifurcation, because the overlaying jailed stent will potentially occupy larger at LCX and become a source of thrombus formation and late narrowing. And also stent size selection is recommended based on the distal diameter. There is a dilemma that currently available stents have smaller expansion capability when stent site is chosen based on distal stent landing diameter, especially left main bifurcation. How can I proceed?
So when it sums out here.
Oh, okay. And you can see clearly that the stent expansion capability differs completely between the, for example, for Synergis 3.0 and 3.5 and 4 millimeter diameter. So if you, generally the diameter of the LMT is over 4 millimeters. So another kissing balloon inflation, the crown is almost straightened due to the kissing balloon inflation when we use the stent based on the distal diameter. So we hypothesize that the stent expansion capability is quite important for acquiring the stent apposition. And the aim is to investigate local flow disturbance in the vicinity of a stent without pot and with pot, but without KVT, or with pot and KVT to gain understanding of the better stenting strategy, and to investigate influence of stent size selection according to proximal stenting landing diameter on normal flow preservation by preserving stent structure in left main vessel and reducing incomplete position and acquiring larger expansion of overlaying gelled stent at CX ostium. So we use the left main bifurcation model as shown here. The diameter LMT is 4.3 and LAD is 3.3 and CX is 3.0. And we already know that 3 times balloon inflation of stent is effective for acquiring minimal cross-sectional area even under the same inflation pressure, and it's already proven by the real-world clinical practice. So in this study, when we use a larger diameter stent, we deploy the stent at very low pressure of 5 atoms 3 times, and then distal optimization and POT and KBT was performed. So we already showed that incomplete stent apposition area surrounded by the gelled protruded stents and lumen were decreased by 3 times kissing balloon inflation shown here, regardless of the stent design with the same inflation pressure. So what we did is using the particle image velocimetry technique, we traced the particle with a diameter of 13 micron, and flow distribution velocity was quantified. So what has happening in this situation, when we use a 3.0 synergy stent without POT, you can see the incomplete stent apposition area along the LMT trunk and also the LCX ostium due to the gelled stent crown. So, and the slow flow region showing blue color is consistent during the cardiac cycles. So if we use a 4 millimeter stent but without POT, we can also see the incomplete stent apposition area at LMT trunk, but the area or space are decreased compared with 3.0 stents. But the CX ostium entrance, the flow disturbance and slow flow region is consistent. So if we use 3 millimeter stents with POT, we can see there were good apposition along the LMT, but you can see that crown is elongated around the circumferential direction of the LMT. And also if we do not KBT, we cannot exclude the flow disturbance at LCX ostium. And also when we use the 4 millimeter stents, good apposition and also preservation of stent crown at LMT is obtained, but the KBT, without KBT, we could not reduce the flow disturbance. And finally, we use a 3 or 3.5 diameter stents, and POT and KBT was performed. We can obtain good apposition, but stent elongation could not be prevented. And gelled crowns were reduced, but due to the limitation of stent expansion capability, we could still see the flow disturbance at the CX ostium. And this one is the final one. When we use a 4 millimeter stent, which has the largest stent expansion capability, and the POT and KBT was performed, we could see quite normal flow even after bifurcation stenting without no flow disturbance at the LMT and CX ostium. So the summary is that POT and KBT are mandatory to reduce incomplete stent apposition. Otherwise, abnormal slow flow region were induced at LMT trunk, and behind gel stent crown during the cardiac cycle, which would be a potential cause of thrombus formation and may necessitate long-term duct. So stent diameter selection based on the proximal vessel diameter is feasible to preserve stent platform design at the LMT and bifurcated region, and also to reduce gel stent crown at CX Austin. And 3 times kissing balloon inflation is also feasible for reducing gel stent crown. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation, and it's really a fine piece of work, because this, your presentation is well balanced with the previews, because the computerized simulation versus an analogic experimental method. You use the PIV as a particle imaging velocimetry. It's also another way to analyze dynamically, step by step, the different sequence of the stenting. So it's very nice, but we can appreciate your image only qualitatively, and we can't quantify.
Yeah, we can quantify the programs method, and
but you know you can tracking and you can quantify.
Yeah.
But
we
at
can
the same
calculate,
time,
for example, for wall shear stress.
Yes, you are right. But unfortunately, with this method, because I appreciate this method, because it's very dynamic, but the quantification with the stent, because the stent is opaque, and so it's very difficult to quantify the region very, very close to the wall. And so the maximum of information is missing with the quantification, because it's difficult with this technique to assess the wall shear stress or oscillatory shear index.
But
what do you think?
Always common to the, depending on the modality of the devices. Even the OCT and IVAS, there is a limitation of the resolution. Yeah. And this one, we use a 4K video camera, so the resolution is a little bit high in currently available devices.
But I think that for the layman, I mean, the person who would be, let us assume the situation that you are in the lab and you get these pictures online. The two major change in your pictures, and I was trying to follow that, is that sometimes the highest velocity was on the top of the struts because the struts were not embedded. And then after the pot, that was the reverse. The high velocity was basically between the struts. That was one of the major change in the pictures, and you have to follow because it went quite quickly. But I think that for the layman, if we review your presentation with time, we will realize that you really relocated the region of high velocity just by doing the pot. I mean, I think that's the key message, which is very impressive because it's very well documented. And of course, you would like to have all the value and the cell tracking and so, but basically that's the pictures which is very convincing by modifying the location of high shear stress and low shear stress.
But I just want to also say that it is so nice that so much can be done at the bench side, right? So this is where you test the various techniques and then you take it to the patient. And I thought that was really well demonstrated here. I mean, it would be nice to have quantification, but even visually, I thought that was pretty powerful.
Another question in the audience?
Yeah.
Thierry, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Iwasaki. I think it was very interesting. And adding to the comment of Patrick about velocity on the wall, I really enjoyed the images after kissing because you modify completely the flow in the side branch where there was area of high and low shear stress in the side branch. So you conclude that maybe it's important for thrombus, but what about long-term outcome? Do you think that these areas of low shear stress just beside the side branch may have an impact on the outcome of the patient?
Yes, generally, several studies already show that using an OCT, but eventually the gel strut is covered with neo-intima. That means that at the beginning of the stage, the thrombus formation and fibrin deposition occurs. And then the neointimal coverage is the final stage. So depending on the degrees of the jailed struts, but there is I suppose critical, we don't know, but there is a critical threshold, but the reducing the incomplete stent apposition there would be important. Yeah.
So the residency time is really what is very important, which gives the time to a monocyte to penetrate the endothelium. If the flow is fast, it gets the flow away from, and if it's slow, you can have this apposition and penetration of the endothelium. And of course, it's valid for atherosclerosis, but it's also valid for neointima. There is a logarithmic relationship between low shear stress and the thickness of the neointima. So we have to take care to optimize the velocity in the shear stress in a way that there is this magic number of 17, and when you are in that area, not too high and not too low, you're okay.
But this study clearly shows that over the cardiac cycle, that means in the every stage, the flow behind the strut is quite low. That's the key.
Yeah, but that the only way to resolve that is to make thin struts and to embed them so that the whole surface is flat and not bumpy with crenated appearance,
But it's why we have to precisely quantify the wall shear stress, because from the literature you know that the optimal wall shear stress is between 1 to 2 Pascal. And precisely when the wall shear stress is less than 0.5, is promote tissue growing, and greater than 2.5 increase the platelet aggregation. And it's why you can qualitatively see the disturbance, but we have to quantify, because if you don't quantify precisely, your appreciation could be wrong.
Well, I think for just quickly for the clinicians, you can actually alter the color code any which way you want. So you got the blue and the red, and it all looks good and bad. But obviously that can be adjusted. But I do think that it's going to be critical to have the long-term clinical studies, because you don't know whether, the 1 Pascal, at least the early data and very preliminary data suggests that less than 1 Pascal, particularly when you have oscillatory flow, is associated with pro-inflammatory and pro-neointimal pathways. But I think we do need the 1-year, 2-year follow-up studies to show that these areas and larger data sets and complex lesions are going to be problematic.
I think what has been so irritating in the shear stress study is always snapshot. And it's a complete vicious circle. I mean, low shear stress generate high shear stress. High shear stress can be responsible finally for plaque ruptures. And they keep going, and we are very happy when we have one OCT mix with angio in 2019 and go back in 2025 to see what happens. But so many circle in between. I mean, in OCT and angioscopy, we have seen small plaque ruptures, and during the time of 52 minutes of the procedure, it was disappear because it's filled in by platelet. We have reported that in Science. So it's a very dynamic process, which is difficult to catch by a snapshot.
It is, and we can set up a separate conference to find the cutoffs, but for now, let's keep moving.
Yes, so in the interest of time, I like to invite Dr. Hikichi to the stage. He will talk to us about the risk of stent sizing in the proximal main vessel in left mains.
Thank you. Oh. No. Please show me my presentation.
Can we get some help?
Oh, okay. Thank you. I compare to the, and I suggest about the stent size and left main bifurcation. I showed this about the three parts. The first part is a background of these studies and the purpose. As we all know, understand about the stent size selection, especially the bifurcation, membrane stent using a stent diameter according to the distal main branch reference. It's a common sense for us. And we all know about the stent design. Usually, many stents have been designed at a diameter of 3.5 or 4.0 millimeter, and their maximum expansion diameter and maximum cell expandability of the side branch are also different. Is it okay to apply the same rule to the left main bifurcation? Well, it's my question. This is both is a different case. We have to stenting left main to the LED crossover stenting. Uses this is 7 French guiding. Focus on the left main bifurcation. Which stent size do you choose? I will definitely choose the stent size that the match to the left main vessel diameter. I verified the possibility of the stent size selection affecting the acute result just after stent implantation. So I used the same as Dr. Iwasaki, and this is we use the standardized elastic 3D left main bifurcation model, and used it two different types designed synergy 3.5 and 4.0 millimeter. The different types synergy implanted the same model using the please show the number 4, the same pressure, same balloon diameter, the final KBI. The pressure of the stent implantation and KBI are for the tail attached to the products. The reason why low pressure expansion is to prevent injury of the distal part of the stent. The stented distal side of the can be safety and reliably placed by additional expansion with an optimal size bifurcation. We call the distal optimization technique. The movie. If you perform just 4 atmosphere, this on the left side is under 4.0 millimeter diameter stent. I implanted just 4 atmosphere, and proximal part implanted 12 atmosphere. After them, this is an image of the simple inflation technique. And I calculated the diameter of the distal part and the proximal part. This technique is not so dangerous for the tapered bifurcation region like this. And in this study show the dot and the pot and distal rewiring and final KBI. Almost same strategy, use the different size synergy stent. First result, finding from the circumflex ostium. This is the overall image after stenting of the left main bifurcation. You can have a different tasting depending on how you look. However, do you think that the difference in the size selecting will lead a difference in the result? So I focus on the circumflex ostium, gelling circumflex ostium, the area. I showed the incomplete center apposition area. This is a 3.5 group, and this is a 4.0 millimeter group. This is the one result. Left side is 3.5, right side for 4.0 millimeter. This is incomplete stent apposition area of the circumflex ostium. Even with the same total same KBI, the ISA area at the circumference ostium was significantly increased in the 3.5 millimeter group. Result second, about the left main shaft. This is the proximal end of the stent. The red is the incomplete stent apposition area. This group is 3.5, and this is 4.0. Compared to the two groups, we calculate this volume from the proximal part of the stent and the carina side. The incomplete stent apposition volume from the proximal part of the stent to the carina also shows a higher tendency in the 3.5 millimeter group. And this is a stent area I calculated, the end of the proximal part. This is 4.0. The elasticity of the proximal end of the stent was no significant difference. However, the stent expansion area, the left side 3.5, right side 4.0 millimeter. Even if KBI performed with same size balloon and same pressure, the stent area obtained will differ depending on the stent size selection. Okay, today's my conclusion. When performed a crossover stent to left main to LED, the stent size should be selected according to the best cell diameter on the proximal side of the bifurcation. By selecting the larger stent size, the incomplete stent apposition area can be reduced at the circumflex ostium after KBI. By doing so, incomplete stent apposition volume can be reduced at the left main shaft after KBI, and stent expansion rate can be greatly increased. And finally, risk of the injury of the LED distal side during the stent implantation can be reduced by through predilatation and divisioning the stent placement method. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Hikichi. Any questions? We only have time for one question or comment. Yeah.
So I think that your observation makes sense because there is this problem of the stent selection for left main, in which we are forced to have systematic undersizing when we perform crossover stenting. So I really kept what is the baseline for that? The results are very interesting. What about the distal main vessel? So at the end, you implant a stent with this technique, which under deployment, you may have a good apposition, but there is a lot of metal over there. I mean, at the end, you have an amount of metal, so the strut to artery ratio is increased.
Yes.
Did you look at that, and should we have any, concern about its impact on the clinical outcome?
I don't know clearly the data. I don't have this clear data, but now I calculated the stent area about the distal part and the proximal part. So next time I'll show.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hikichi. We always appreciate your presence here, and we can move to the next. Okay. Dr. Kume, he's gonna talk to us about the effect of RIPOT on the distal main vessel strut protrusion.
Please change this, right?
Slides here, if somebody can fix it quickly.
Really, I'm glad to be here in Barcelona, and I'd like to talk about a bench test. So the slide is ready. Thank you. The title is Effective Proximal Balloon Edge Dilatation Technique for Opening Side Branch Ostium in Report Sequence. As for single crossover stent implantation in bifurcation lesion, report sequence comprising first pot and side branch inflation and final pot significantly improves the final result in bifurcation lesions. Previously, we performed the bench test using this non-fractal bifurcation bench model to evaluate the effect of stent link position on side branch gelling. In that study, side branch ostium were directly observed using video scope like this. So please click on the movie. So regardless of stent, different kind of stent. So this is the movie, so please click on. Okay, thank you. Regardless of different kind of stent, the side branch gelling was significantly increased. How about another stent? Sorry. The side branch gelling was significantly increased during the second pot procedure. In addition, regardless of link position, side branch gelling ratio was significantly increased during the second pot procedure. The possible mechanism of this phenomenon was that the stent deformed toward the side branch after side branch dilatation. A second pot reformed toward the main vessel back to its original shape, and thus increasing side branch gelling due to the stent deployed at the side branch vessel wall being pulled towards the main vessel. Like this. So we hypothesize that side branch inflation using shorter balloon might minimize the stent deformation at the main branch. To test this hypothesis, we compare the proximal balloon edge dilatation for side branch dilatation and conventional longer balloon dilatation group. This time we use a fractal bench model. This bench model having a 3.5 millimeter distal main vessel and 3.0 millimeter side branch. The branching angle was 70 degrees. The first pot was performed using 4.0 millimeter non-compliant balloon, and then using 3.0 millimeter non-compliant balloon for side branch dilatation. And we compared between the proximal balloon edge dilatation group and conventional group. And then the second pot was performed using same balloon as first pot. FT-OCT system were used in this study. OCT analysis was performed millimeter by millimeter. The rate of mal-apposed stent strut at the opposite side of the side branch ostium were analyzed in this study, and the ellipticity ratio was calculated as maximum stent diameter divided by minimum stent diameter at both proximal and distal segment. Ellipticity ratio at both proximal and distal segment was similar between the two groups. This slide shows the change of rate of Mehrotra stent strut at the opposite side of the side branch ostium. As you can see, the Mehrotra stent strut was numerically decreased during the second pot procedure. Before the second pot procedure, rate of stent Mehrotra stent strut were numerically lower in pivot group compared with the conventional group. After second pot procedure, the rate of Mehrotra strut was similar between the two groups. Therefore, the change in the rate of Mehrotra strut was numerically less in pivot group compared with the conventional group. The side branch gelling ratio was significantly increased during the second pot procedure. Gelling ratio before the second pot procedure were similar between the two groups. However, after second pot procedure, the gelling ratio in pivot group was tended to be lower compared with the conventional group, and thus the change in gelling ratio during the second pot procedure was significantly smaller in pivot group than that in conventional group. This slide shows the representative oocyte images. As you can see in the pivot group, the stent struts were well opposed at the opposite side of the side branch ostium, even at before the second pot procedure. On the other hand, in conventional group, you can see the Mehrotra stent strut at the opposite side of the side branch ostium before the second pot procedure. And of course, after the second pot procedure, these Mehrotra struts were well opposed to the basal wall. So this is a representative video microscope images. In pivot group, the gelling ratio was not increased during the second pot procedure. On the other hand, in conventional group, gelling ratio was increased by 50% during the second pot procedure. In conclusion, report sequence is excellent piece of procedure for bifurcation lesions. In report sequence, proximal balloon edge dilatation technique with short balloon for side branch inflammation might minimize the worsening of gelling ratio at side branch ostium during second pot procedure. Thank you for your kind attention.
A very quick comment here.
Yes, very quick. Thank you, Dr. Kume. And I have a comment on your presentation because your main objective is to refine the effect of the sequence according to the pre-existing data. And so I agree with you, no technique is perfect. But the whole rationale of the report is based on the diameter flow scaling law. And unfortunately, your bench in the first part and described in your paper is not based on and doesn't respect the fractal law. Your diameter will remain constant between the mother vessel and the main branch, 3 millimeter. In your bench, 2.5 for the side branch, 3.5, for example, for the main branch, and so the diameter of the mother vessel expected is 4 millimeter. The differential diameter is 0.5 millimeter, and so in this case, the geometry of the bifurcation polygon is totally different. And so your balloon in this case, pot and repot, is not necessary. It's not useful because you have the same. The pot has an interest because there is a differential diameter systematically based on the fractal geometry on the first part. And the main comment of this study, and so because you use a non-compliant balloon for this inflation and the pot is non-useful in this bench, you gain not in radial compliance, but in longitudinal compliance, and you facilitate the protrusion of the strut inside the main branch. And so when you compare 8 to 8 with an 8 to 8 comparison, like in GACC in 2005, you can compare in the fractal geometry and you don't see the same detrimental effect. Even if I know that no technique is perfect, and that depends for the angulation, the angle of the bifurcation play a pivotal role in the quality of the final result. And so it's just a comment, an additional comment for this paper. But thank you for your experiment.
Yeah, thank you for your wonderful comment. Based on your comment, I changed the bench model. Yeah, you know, previously we used a non-fractal model, but at this time,
in your presentation, you use a fractal at the end. But in your paper, published in CC,
yes, that's right. You're right.
You use a non-fractal.
Yes.
So your conclusion can be discuted.
Okay, well noted. Room for some improvements here. Thank you. And in the interest of time, let's move to the next speaker.
The next speaker, I invite Dr. Paradies from his presentation in the DK-Culotte versus TAP in vitro comparison of thrombogenicity and flow.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the kind invitation. I'm going to present a result from a bench study where our group compared DK crash technique versus TAP. So we did assess thrombogenicity and flow. We do know that change in flow may impact on biological process which may end up actually in stent thrombosis and restenosis. We do know that local hemodynamic forces in stented segment impact on plaque formation and progression. It has been shown that there is an inverse proportional correlation between endothelial shear stress and new intimal thickness. But we also know that malapose struts are associated with a higher risk of stent thrombosis. So the objective of our study was to compare DK crash versus TAP technique to evaluate their different effects in terms of strut apposition and thrombus formation in vitro models using OCT and computational flow reconstruction. We use 12 stents in total, 6 from each platform, in a bifurcation Y-shaped model. Stents were from the same platform were deployed using TAP or DK crash. Final pot was systematically performed for all the experiments. OCT pullback was performed from main vessel and side branch before and after pot. And silicone models were then perfused with porcine blood at a flow rate of 200 millimeter per minute for 4 minutes. Thrombus area was then ultimately calculated from OCT pullback after perfusion. And these are optical microscopic images of the silicone model. Malapose struts were defined as struts protruding to the lumen at the distance greater than the strut thickness. Floating struts were all the struts in the opening angle of the side branch. Side branch obstruction was defined as the ratio between the longest strut-free distance divided per the side branch diameter. And these are representative images of the OCT analysis of the thrombus formation. So the bifurcation region was divided into distal, middle, and proximal region. And here are shown our results. So all the analyzed struts, the total number and the percentage of malapose and floating struts did not differ between the two techniques when we compared the results for each platform, but also when we combine the results for all the stents. Then we analyze all the diameters, so the mean, the maximum, and the minimum diameter, both in the main branch and the side branch. And we then calculated the cross-sectional area and the side branch obstruction for the side branch. And as you can see here, we did not find any statistically difference between the two techniques. Here are shown our result for OCT analysis of thrombus formation. So the clot area did not differ between the two techniques, even when it was calculated according to the location within the bifurcation region, even though we actually can notice a higher thrombus formation in the distal part of the bifurcation region. Here are our results from the computational flow model reconstruction. So as expected, we find it in higher risk for shear stress at the level of the bifurcation region. The maximum shear stress was higher for TAP, but the area of higher shear stress and the area of recirculation was actually similar between the two techniques, and the percentage of flow into the main vessel as well. And finally, we wanted to demonstrate that there's a benefit of the pot in both the techniques. So we wanted to prove that the detrimental effect, potential detrimental effect of the double kissing did not really impact on the final result of eccentricity index when if the pot was systematically performed. So we concluded our results, our study, saying that there were no difference in terms of stent strut apposition. A similar acute thrombus formation rate was detected, that pot significantly reduced eccentricity index, but these two techniques, even when performed in silicone model, are associated with some rate of stent malapposition. Thanks for your attention.
Much. Any comment in the panel or in the audience? From the yes.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah. Okay, so it's quite interesting that there were some differences in the hemodynamics with differences in flow rate, but still there were no difference in the morphometric findings by OCT, and this translated to a similar clot formation. So I do not know whether we can actually base our predictions for the thrombus formation simply on morphometric measures.
Well, that's an interesting comment. Actually, these study have the limitation, of course, in vitro study. The thrombogenicity model with porcine blood, perfusion with porcine blood is it's actually well tested, and we have done other tests and proved that, for example, malapposition with the same model of thrombogenicity is trustable. So we have proved that, for example, non-opposed versus malopposed stent struts with the same model showed a significant difference. But drawing conclusive conclusions, actually, from definitive conclusions from this model, this is something that it's not really easy to do.
And the location of thrombus detected by OCT was really correlated with the prediction of the CFD in the Karina, for example.
Yeah,
there's good correlation between between
we
CFD location and your
exactly. We did expect
your quantification.
That. Yeah, we did expect.
Yes.
And we found a correlation between the higher thrombus formation in the distal area of the bifurcation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting study. I think one of the problems with the TAP is that you are creating a neocarina, and it's not a surprise to see that you have problems at this level. So, do you have done the same study with the T technique instead of the TAP technique?
Not really. No, that was defined as the model was a TAP, and yeah.
Yeah, just another brief comment in the same direction. Can we interpret your results like you have to do 9 steps of decay crush to achieve the same what you get with stenting?
Yeah, that's another way of seeing. Yeah.
Thanks, I like that
yeah.
conclusion.
Okay.
So lots of pain and no gain, because the motto is no pain, no gain. But very quick point, this is a beautiful representation of how we can couple biology with biomechanics in vitro in a very reproducible way and very cost-effective way.
Yeah, so thank you so much again. Next, we're going to have Dr. Toth on DK-Culotte bench.
Thank you very much. I would like to present to you our results in bench model testing whether a DK approach would also give some advantages to the Culotte technique. So we all know, it was also discussed during the session, previous talks, that if we dilate any devices in the non-stented daughter branch, that causes deformation in the stented brain, in the stented vessel. And this is well demonstrated on this image. We have already seen similar images during the previous talks. But we also know there is a solution. We can either prevent it or correct it by kissing dilation. But when we talk about preventing or correcting, we have to understand preventing, it's always a predictable action with a predictable outcome. So we mainly like it in medicine. Correcting, it contains a certain uncertainty for our procedures. And this issue exists during Culotte as well. Here you can see when you open the main branch and then you inflate the main branch stent. This really happens during Culotte technique. And here you can see this major deformation in the side branch stent. One can say, well, we will correct it with the final kissing, but then the other can say, good, then you have to first rewire it properly. And this can be challenging in patients as in bench models as well. And what we have learned from DK crush as a principle that the first kissing helps a lot to adapt the first stent to prevent future deformation of the first stent caused by inflation placing the stent in the second branch. And the second kiss doesn't do anything else but optimizes the second stent and maintaining the already achieved good result in the first stent. So the question of our study was whether we can apply this approach to the Culotte as well. And what we did, it was nothing else but performing the inverted Culotte and adding this step. If it works, it could. Yeah, adding this first kissing dilation just prior placing the stent to the main branch, and before and after the whole procedure goes just exactly like a regular Culotte technique. And as you can see on this image, this is what we did. And I would like to ask you to remember the previous video with the regular Culotte, and remember then have a look here. What happens, there is practically no deformation in the side branch ostium, in the side branch stent, by putting the stent in the main branch. While when we just did what we discussed, by the first kissing, we already optimized the result in the side branch, and we already prepared the side branch result as it will be after placing the main branch stent. And the final second kissing, as always, it will just maintain this result and optimizing the main branch result. So we did in-bench evaluation of this technique comparing to conventional Culotte and to DK crush. 888 procedures were performed, And we evaluated procedural characteristics, malapposition with OCT, and we did micro-CT analysis as well. Here you can see the models what we used. We wanted to use different type of models in terms of angulation, as you can see, and also in sizes, following Finet law in diameters. And just back, as we defined for the analysis, we had analysis in the ostium of the side branch, in the distal main branch, in the proximal main branch, and we divided the bifurcation area to abostial area and to ostial area, and there to the roof and to the carina, just to understand perfectly where potential malapposition rate differences come from. Here you can see just a fluoroscopic image of all the procedures what we did. As it is, it's not that informative, but still you have an insight how the final results were with one another technique. And first of all, as said, we evaluated procedural characteristic. We focused on total duration of the procedure and rewiring times, representing the difficulty of the cases. There were significant difference in total procedural time, favoring, interestingly, the DK-Culotte, despite this additional step. And as you can see, the first rewiring, it was very similar for all procedures. Of course, it's just the same as said for Culotte and for DK-Culotte as well. But the second rewiring, it was much quicker, we can say even easier as compared to conventional Culotte when the first kissing was already performed. And again, why this rewiring issue or difference come from? As you can see here, it's just the same as it was on the video. If you perform double kissing, then the result in the side branch is practically perfect from the beginning and maintained after putting the main branch stent, as compared to conventional case when it was not performed. There is major deformation in the ostium of the side branch stent, which can obviously cause difficulties for rewiring or can cause inappropriate rewiring. Evaluating the malapposition rate, we have seen no difference in malapposition as compared to Culotte, but major differences in malapposition rates as compared to DK crush. And as said, we wanted to understand where this difference comes from, and interesting, or I mean, and what we found that the difference in major malapposition was mainly in the proximal main branch, exactly there where with DK crush we have the triple layer practically, and there was a major difference in the malapposition rates favoring DK-Culotte in the roof of the polygon of confluence. Again, this is the transition zone to the triple layer in DK crush, where of course a good apposition is hardly expected. There was some difference in perfect apposition rate in the abostial side of the bifurcation, where Culotte and DK-Culotte performed worse as compared to DK crush. This is where the struts might be limited by the side branch stent, but importantly, there was no difference in moderate and major malapposition, so it was only the perfect apposition rate which was different. Here you can see some examples of the micro-CT. I just want to show we assessed the luminal openings and of course and also the bifurcation angulation, how much it changed as compared to the native angulation. And what we found, there was no difference in the stenosis and luminal opening, but interestingly, DK crush changed the most the bifurcation angulation. Culotte and DK-Culotte changed it much less as compared to the native result, as compared to the original angulation. So what we concluded from this data, that actually this double kissing approach, the idea of double kissing, it can help also to optimize the Culotte technique, so we can learn it from the crush and mini crush, we can adapt it to Culotte as well. And these advantages can be expressed in terms of procedural aspects. Despite this additional stent, it seems to be quicker and more straightforward or more predictable. And also in terms of final result or procedural result, in terms of apposition, it was also better performance. In this respect, DK-Culotte may be superior, not only to Culotte, but also to DK crush technique. Of course, this is just bench test with all the limitations. So now it's time to evaluate or understand how it works in patients. This is needed and it's going on. Thank you very much for your attention.
great. Thank you so much for this really interesting talk. Do we have questions? Yeah? Yves, yeah?
Just a question I have not heard, how you cross toward the first crossing of the wire and second crossing of wire. Was it close to carena or was it proximal? What we call proximal, or opposite to carena?
So actually this can be if you look at this Culotte technique in general, or here, actually we do the provisional 2 times. So all the steps, all the rewiring should follow what we learned from provisional. It's a provisional towards the side branch, then a provisional towards the main branch. So rewiring should be exactly like in provisional.
So you cross close to the carena.
Exactly.
And this will avoid the accumulation of metal at the carena level.
Exactly.
Okay.
One more?
So this should hold true for also for a planned tap technique, that for a planned tap, if you are not provisional, you are deciding to do 2 stent with the tap technique, you should do a kissing before putting in the second stent. So this same experiment would be also beneficial for a tap technique. So if you have to do a T or a tap, you do a kissing before you insert the second stent. That should also be beneficial, similarly like in Culotte.
Well, so as I learned tap technique, we start with the provisional. So we finish main branch kissing, and then we understand whether we have to place a second stent in tap or not. So we perform there anyhow. So in tap, we do these steps, this double kissing actually all the time, at least. Excellent.
One more? Another question over here?
Thank you very much, Gabor. I think it's very interesting, and you are beating DK-Culotte, so I like it very much. Just one short question is, did you compare the 3 times pot to double kissing? Those when doing Culotte, do you have some information from the bench? So
no.
Doing pot at each level, what you have done, without kissing or with kissing?
So what we just compared, we performed pot actually after each step, but we didn't compare whether we should really do that all the time or just at the beginning and the end.
It could be interesting to know if there is a difference in terms of apposition, etc. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Moving on.
Thank you, and I am pleased to introduce Dr. Chatzizisis. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Dr. Chiastra, and the presentation is entitled Computational Hemodynamics in Patient-Specific Stented Bifurcation, Reconstructed by Intravascular Imaging.
So thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. So computational fluid dynamics simulations allow the calculation of hemodynamic quantities that are hardly measurable or impossible to detect in vitro or in vivo. As you can see on the pictures on the right, the simulations enable to display the velocity patterns within the bifurcation or to compute the Gaussian stress-based descriptors, which can be associated to adverse events such as the in-stent restenosis. When considering the patients, today the fusion of OCT with angiography enables the 3D reconstruction of patient-specific coronary bifurcation models that include the stent to be used for very highly detailed CFD simulations. And the main goal of this simulation is the assessment of the local hemodynamics immediately after stenting and the better understanding of restenosis and thrombosis processes. And I hope also in the closer future also the prediction of these adverse events. Here you can see patient-specific CFD simulation. In particular, this is a circumflex artery treated with a very long stent. This is a 38 millimeter long resolute integrity. At the bottom, there is the contour map of the Gaussian stress. In the boxes, the velocity streamlines which are passing over the stent struts on the left and through the bifurcation on the right. And you can appreciate the very high anatomical details and the high stent reconstruction quality. However, there are still some open issues that should be considered before applying this type of technology to many patients. And these issues regards both the 3D reconstruction of the stented vessel and the CFD simulations themselves. Regarding the 3D reconstruction, some of these issues are to identify the smoothness of the lumen surface, the correct smoothness, the OCT motion artifacts, and the reconstruction time. Regarding the CFD simulation, some of these issues are related to the boundary conditions, to the rigid wall assumption, and to the simulation time. I will focus now on these issues about the 3D reconstruction. And I will consider an example case which was done in collaboration with the University of Nebraska. Starting from the OCT images of the main vessel and the side branch, we segmented the lumen contours and the stent struts, and at the same time, we extracted the vessel center lines from two angiographic views. Then we place the lumen contours and the stent struts orthogonal to the vessel center lines to obtain the 3D stented geometry. And finally, we performed the computational fluid dynamics simulation. We considered an LAD treated with a resolute integrity. We performed a steady state analysis by applying at the inlet a parabolic velocity profile, and the outlets a flow split based on a diameter-based scaling law. We changed the OCT frame distance when reconstructing the lumen model, and thus we changed the number of considered OCT frames. In particular, we considered 4 different geometries with an OCT frame distance on 0.2, 0.5, 1, and 1.5 millimeter. We focused on the stented region, and the Iwasaki stress on the stented region, and from a qualitative viewpoint, you can see that the contour maps are very similar. However, from a quantitative viewpoint, the differences are not negligible. In particular, we computed the mean Iwasaki stress and the low percentage area with low Iwasaki stress in the center region, and we found differences up to 13%. So, which is the correct OCT frame distance to be chosen? In a very recent study, the surface roughness of 6 porcine LADs was measured using optical microscopy. On the right, you can see the 3D reconstruction of the lumen of a portion of the lumen surface, which represent an area of 1.6 per 1.6 millimeters. And you can see that this surface is smooth with some ondulations and some ridges in the circumferential direction. And according to this study, we might say that probably the OCT frame distance of 0.5 millimeters might be correct, as it is able to capture the ondulations of the vessel. Other issues are related to the OCT motion artifacts, and one of them is the L-view elongation compression of the vessel. As you can see here, this is another case, an LAD treated with an absolute scaffold, and you can see that the central region of the stent is compressed. So the stent rings are shorter, and this might affect in a wrong way the hemodynamics results. Regarding the CFD simulations, I will focus only on the boundary condition, and in particular on the inlet boundary condition. Ideally, at the inlet of the model, we would like to apply a velocity which is measured at that location of the patient. And it is possible to use intravascular Doppler ultrasound measurements. However, this type of measurements are not commonly used in clinical practice, and they are not always reliable. As an alternative, we can use a diameter-based law or the frame count method, which is based in counting the number of frames of angiographic frames for the contrast agent from passing from the inlet to the outlet of the vessel. However, this method is very rough. Considering the previous example case, The correct frame rate was estimated based on 4 frames. However, if we count 3 frames or 5 frames instead of 4, the hemodynamic results are different. And although the contour maps of osseous stress are similar, from a quantitative viewpoint, the differences are very high and higher than 20%. So in conclusion, the current technology enables the 3D reconstruction of stented coronary bifurcation models from OCT and angiography to perform highly detailed patient-specific CFD analysis. However, there are some open issues regarding both the 3D reconstruction and the CFD simulations, and the application to large clinical datasets still require a reliable, very fast methodology. And I think also there is a need of more cooperation between engineers and cardiologists to solve this type of issues. I would like to thank the research team from Politecnico di Torino, Politecnico di Milano, University of Nebraska, and the Gemelli Hospital in Rome. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We are very busy. The time is very short, and I'm sorry, but I have to introduce Dr. Chatzizisis for the last presentation, European Big Data Club, updates from Flow ESR study.
Okay. Thank you, Gerald. Hello, everybody. So, big data. Those are my disclosures. We live in an era of big data, and we have different tools to handle and dig into those data. We have AI, deep and machine learning, and of course we have computational simulations. When it comes to bifurcation, which is our area, it's quite a mess here. So is there any ideal bifurcation strategy? It's a multifactorial issue. Really, there's no ideal bifurcation strategy because we don't take into account the individual patient-specific anatomy and physiology, and that's what probably we should be doing. And by doing so, we can have the computational approach, which takes into account all the individual conditions and helps us with procedural planning to achieve better outcomes. So we developed this computational stenting simulation platform. We call it Optimize, which this is a workflow. It processes angio, any intracoronary imaging, IVUS, OCT, or even non-invasive imaging like CT. Then we reconstruct the vessels. We apply mechanical properties of the plaque. We use realistic stents, we mesh the wall and the stents, and then we apply computational stenting simulations. The beauty here is that we can handle any data as input, either non-invasive imaging or any intracoronary imaging or just angio as well. Plus, we need to know just the procedures of the details of the procedure. All the rest, it can happen offline. That platform, this computational stenting simulation platform, is accurate, is feasible, and we're now working to make it even near real-time applicable to be a cost and time-effective process. Just briefly, an example of accuracy. On the left, we have a micro-CT. It's a bench test. And then we have the same bifurcation stented with the same exact stent. On the right-hand side, with a computational simulation, you can see pretty good agreement between the two approaches, the reality and the simulation. And then we cut serially frames from the proximal main vessel to the distal, and you can appreciate pretty comparable results. Even in the third from the top, you can see some malapposition in reality, which is produced by the computational approach. That approach, this computational stenting simulation, is a very time and cost-effective way to optimize stents, techniques, to optimize stent designs, and to educate, train our colleagues, trainees, and staff. Coming to how this can help us optimize stenting techniques, we have conducting the FLOW-SR study, ProPod in Japan, and the whole concept is that on the top we have the computational stenting simulation. We take the data, OCT of main and side branch, angio, we reconstruct the vessel, we apply realistic wall properties, stent properties, and then we compare the final endpoint, which is flow dynamics and stent apposition, with reality coming from OCT. And the major objective here is to create a bifurcation atlas. I'll show you here what I mean by that. So we have 120 patients. Each of those bifurcations is stented computationally with 4 different techniques: DK-Culotte, T, TAP, Culotte, and provisional, of course. And then we use as endpoints biomechanics and stent morphometry. And we know that those endpoints are surrogates of clinical outcomes. So the bottom line here is that we envision to subgroup the bifurcations based on bifurcation angle and based on the disease complexity to find groups of bifurcations which are treated best with specific stenting techniques. And this is going to inform probably the clinicians in terms of like how we can treat individual bifurcations in the cath lab. So essentially we talk about bifurcationomics, if I may, to use this term. We use large clinical data. We have as input computational simulations. Then we use AI to dig into those data. And finally, the output is the improved bifurcation outcomes. We talk about a virtual clinical trial approach, and I'll explain why this and how EBC can help in this direction. This computational stenting simulation approach also can help us optimize stent designs, and I'll talk to this about this in the next session. And then also it can help us educate and train proceduralists. This is a case here of a TAP. So it's a patient-specific bifurcation. We use realistic stents here. The wall properties are also realistic. We have all the opportunity here to get into the procedure, to see how different approaches, different access to the side branch, different pot approaches can change the stent geometry. Now we're going to go to the side branch from the strut proximal to the carina to open the struts. And then we're delivering the second stent with the other main vessel balloon in place. We deploy the stent in the side branch, and then we pull this balloon back and do the final kissing balloon inflation here, next, coming here. So this gives us an opportunity to learn and to train ourselves and become wiser. Also, we have the opportunity to fly through. This is a computational stenting approach. We can very easily fly through, see how the stents behave. This is another fly through. This is a TAP. You see the deployment of the side branch stent, and now you see the kissing balloon, how it restores the neocarina here. It's coming right here. Okay? So we can experiment in a very cost and time-effective way and learn and improve potentially our knowledge and potentially our outcomes. So to conclude, take-home messages, we have computational simulations as well as in-vitro simulations, of course, which generate big data, and using tools to dig in those data, which are AI tools, machine learning, deep learning, we can create a bifurcation, which is a spectrum of bifurcation anatomies and simulations, enhancing our knowledge of how bifurcation PCI performs and how we can optimize this. So there is a EBC call, and Dr. Stankovic is going to be more precise tomorrow. But at this point, we need data. All those computational approaches are hungry for data. The more data we have, the more big data we have, the more accurate are the computational predictions. So we are going to create a cloud, and this cloud will be open to the community, to the EBC community, where you can upload cases, angiography cases, plus intracoronary imaging with IVUS or OCT, and also the procedure, the detailed report of what happened with this stenting approach in any language. So simple request we'll get to you with more details, but the request is to start collecting data, and by collecting data and having the whole footprint and spectrum of bifurcation geometries, we can get important information through computational approaches about our bifurcation techniques. And of course, we respect patient-sensitive data. So a big thank to my group. They are the heroes behind this. All those scientists and colleagues around the globe have been instrumental in those studies. a big thank to the Japanese community, the Flora Star Steering Committee, and to the funding sources of these endeavors. Thank you for your attention.
Sorry.
So thank you, Yanis. So it was a dream that we had many years ago already. So it will be open to the whole community of ABC to send their anatomies, their procedures, their final OCT, and we can imagine that what you can do with this. But will it be also open to different engineer teams?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Will it be open also to different engineer teams
to
work on this cloud database?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This is a tool, but also, actually this is the data, but also we're going to come up with a tool with the groups to analyze those data, yes.
So you have to write some laws.
We'll come up with a consensus on bifurcation stenting simulations.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to congratulate you and the team for the vision of moving forward and essentially democratizing the data and leveraging it to try to answer questions that we don't know. I think everything we've heard so far just tells us how little, and we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of progress to be made. So I think it is very exciting, and I think there are a lot of engineering challenges like Claudio presented. The stent reconstructions are not trivial. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and on the finite element analysis and plaque characterization and plaque geometry. So I think collecting the data at this point and then marrying artificial intelligence and machine learning with the biomechanics, I think will expedite the process. So really exciting, and you have to make sure you keep everyone's data, the proprietary and HIPAA and GDPR and stuff. So there's some logistical issues, but really exciting.
Yeah, we'll take care of this. Yes, absolutely.
Just a quick question before I guess we're closing. Amazing work, really fascinating. I was wondering if you could briefly comment on the uncertainty quantification. You showed this image, and at a first glance it looks similar, but you would probably, most of us know that the devil is in the details. So perhaps you can make some comments on that.
On the
uncertainty quantification in terms of how accurate, because there were some differences. Yeah.
So I don't know if I have that one. Actually, I was expecting this question, not from you though. This is validated, this platform, not only in vitro, but also we have 120 patients which have known by OCT endpoint what stent diameters and apposition we had by OCT in main vessel side branch. And we take exactly the same geometries, we reconstruct those, we follow exactly the same techniques that the Japanese followed with the same mistakes or the same advantages or whatever, and we replicate the whole procedure, applying realistic wall properties, stent properties, and comparing our morphometry of the stent endpoint to the actual by OCT. And this is one of the cases showing very good agreement. You see here, it's a calcific stenosis in the LED diagonal. You see on the right-hand side, which is the reality, the under-expansion of the stent by the carina point because of the calcium. And then on the left-hand side, we replicate exactly the same procedure, and we replicate exactly the same under-expansion of the stent at that point, similar flow conditions and similar stent morphometry on the right-hand side. So it's quite powerful, and I can assure you that it works very accurately at this point.
I think one of the key data that you need to collect, and that's why I'm a little bit nervous about retrospective data, because we all know that in the cath lab we work quickly, we put balloons. We don't even always capture what pressure a certain balloon was inflated for how long. I think obviously prospective data collection would be very powerful, right? Yeah. Because then you're recording the diameter of the balloon, the duration of inflation, and if you're going to ultimately use that for machine learning purposes, you really need high quality data to inform those algorithms. If you have retrospective data and you don't, you have some imaging, you don't know exactly when the OCT was done in a cloud, I think it'll be more challenging.
This is absolutely the right point. This is prospective data. This, what I show here is prospective data. It's not retrospective data. Yep.
Yes.
It's very fascinating big data program. I mean, we'll give, I'm sure will provide very useful and data and how to do. But in the meantime, I mean, there is some differences in approaches. Whether you are using the same technique, inter-operators differences in executing, performing tap, for example, or DK crash or whatever. So how you can manage that?
That's a very valid point, because we can inform a physician on what is the optimal approach for a given bifurcation, but nobody can assure us that the physician, the individual physician, will execute according to the plan. Probably we need to educate ourselves better, and by knowing what's going on, we'll get better education. But you're right, that's a human variable that I don't think at this point we can easily control. I don't have a direct answer here.
Yeah, but do you think that some recommendation can be given to who want to participate to this big data? I mean, a recommendation how to perform this or that?
I think at this point it has to be open to the EBC community. We are a beautiful group of experts here. I don't think we're isolated. I don't think we should isolate ourselves. I think it should open to the community of EBC and also other people. Collecting data doesn't hurt. And AI people might be here as well. They know very well the more the data, the better the chances for this computational approach to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yanis. It's time to close this session. Thank you for your attention. Have a good night.